Good afternoon, Maine. This is the Muddy Waters podcast, and I am your host, as always, Chuck Ellis, your swamp guide, if you will, helping you navigate the muddy waters of Maine and somewhat, to some degree, a little bit here and there, national politics. And I do that not by being the expert in all ways and knowing absolutely everything, though I do try to get as informed and continue to be more informed, but I do it more by bringing on people who are already informed, people who are involved in the process. And if you're hoping to clean your palate from our episode last night, where we had a what I think is probably a Democrat Socialist of America on the podcast, you will be able to do that with a conservative, a Republican, Representative David Boyer. Thanks so much for joining us, David.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, really excited to have you, and I'm happy to have people from all perspectives on the podcast. I'm just going to probably argue more with people that are on the other side when I think they're wrong, and kind of pose positions. Yesterday was really interesting because I had Rafael Macias on
From Valley.
from Topsom. Yeah, so he's definitely tries to interestingly tries to present more as a moderate, more as a reasonable person, but all of his speaking points are straight out of like the DSA playbook. And so it was really interesting. I'm happy to have him on, happy to have the conversation again. What I say about this podcast is the goal is to like have conversation and get the people of Maine better informed about, what their options are essentially. And they got to see on display what the other side has to offer. And then also what I countered, maybe not as well as I would have liked in every case, but with some good points on the other side. So anyway, but today we have you, and we just want to thank you for taking the time to come on, and want to start where, if this is the first time you've come on, just give people an opportunity to know you do make your way into some of the clips. You've been on with Steve Robinson, and so I think you're one of the more well-known members of the House. But yeah, I want to give people who maybe don't know who you are, understanding of who you are, where you come from, what got you involved in politics, and to where you are today.
Oh, wow. Where do you start? I guess I'd start with, Ron Paul cured my apathy. It's a saying that's come across in libertarian circles. All these people in 2008 and 2012 getting fired up and interested in politics for the first time, realizing that at the national level on a lot of major issues, the two parties are the same. And no one's concerned with our foreign policy. No one's concerned with our monetary policy, in which we print to band-aid our economic woes, and eventually that's going to come to a head, and there's going to be a market correction. So Ron Paul was the only one talking about the Federal Reserve, talking about the Fourth Amendment and the Patriot Act. Back then in 2010 and 2008, 2012, that was a big issue, and it still is. I guess we've ceded some privacy for convenience, and we don't care quite as much. It feels like, but he got me started, and that's how I got to Maine. I got a job on his campaign back in 2011, and they sent me to Maine. I'm from Maryland originally, so I am a Flatlander, born in exile. Got here as soon as I could. I think Angus King's can they said once, because he's from Virginia, and so he said, "I love my mother too much to hold it against her." So, but no, Maine's awesome, and we stuck around. I stuck around. Had some success there at the Maine 2012 convention, the infamous convention. 3,500 people coming out to the Civic Center. It was awesome. A lot of new blood into the party, and just been working at it since. I'm grateful to be in a position in my life, in my 20s and 30s, to um, be an activist, to be an organizer, to make a living doing that, and paying the mortgage and trying to save the world. So I'm very blessed and grateful to be able to have a career in politics to some degree, and now I'm in my second term of a state representative, represent Poland and Mechanic Falls in the state house, and that's been an interesting kind of flip side to being in the halls trying to talk to politicians to being one. But I'm doing my best and trying to keep it going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I can only imagine what it's like to. I mean, politics in general in America, in 2025 is that are kind of a bit of a nightmare. Just in terms of like the policies that are being passed, but is on top of that, that's bad enough. But then there's the polarization where if you don't agree with us on this, you're not human. If you don't agree with us, and on the other side,
Sure.
it's just a very challenging time to be a conservative, but especially be in politics. But then especially to be, I keep saying conservative. You're more, I think, libertarian esque. I think is my understanding, but probably maybe a conservative libertarian.
How do
You
you
can
see
get
the
into.
difference?
It's a great question.
There. If you believe in limited government, I think it's the logical extension of conservatism. It was Ronald Reagan who said, "Libertarian's the heart and soul of conservatism." So, anytime I'm arguing for those positions with my colleagues, I try to frame it in that way. I thought we're the party of small government and more freedom. So why are you against X or why are we for Z? Um, but yes, I definitely in the liberty wing of the Republican Party for sure, for sure.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, which I think gets into some of the other stuff that you've kind of done along the way, but we'll get back to that. Um, but yeah, just being a conservative in Maine, being in politics, then being a conservative in Maine, where you go to the state house every day and you hear people. I mean, you try to do stuff, and basically everything that you say falls on deaf ears because the people on the other side of the aisle are just going to largely march in lockstep with one another, and they're going to win. And you can't convince them for the most part. Especially on a lot of the bigger issues that I think a lot of the people care about. We'll use the issue of like boys and girls sports and spaces, right? Like one where the people are with us, and yet you can't even get you can't get representatives to go to vote, against their party leadership. And then we even in the Senate had somebody, well, who's since left the party, but voted in favor of keeping boys and girls sports. And yeah, it's just a really challenging time to go in every day and feel like all you do is lose. And then at the same time, you have the people who vote Republican who are mad at the legislature for not doing enough. Like, David, why haven't you done more? Why didn't you make that bill pass, for instance?
For sure. No, and we're the people they see in the grocery stores and at the transfer station, and so sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, and but that's what we signed up for, and so I understand a lot of times it's folks are just frustrated with everything, and we're the representation of all that the is political, and so we hear it. But no, you're right. It's tough. It's tough serving up there and getting your teeth kicked in every day. Um, we try to make the argument. We get the roll call votes, get them on the record so we can use it come election time. But you know, truth is, some people they make up the worst things about us anyway. So when my side gets worried about a vote, this vote or that vote, it's like vote your conscience, vote your district, but they're just going to say, you hate dogs and you hate your grandma and whatever. They just. I saw it this last go around with I was helping Senator Bruce Bickford in Auburn in that district, and they said he's against homeless veterans. They take one vote you had, or you vote against a budget that has a million things in it, right? Just like Congress, you have these budgets, these omnibus bills with everything in it, and if you don't vote for it, then you're against everything that it supported, and there's no nuance. I've been try to hold space for nuance up there on both sides of the issues, Republican and Democrat. It's tough. Um, the transgender issue. I with my caucus on that. I just wish league went about it in a different way, and because they're still kids, they're still Mainers, they're still neighbors, and there's a way you go about it and a way you don't, and so it's tough, but it is important work. It's important. There's gains that we do get to make in the committee. Some of my colleagues don't think we should make a bad bill better, and I struggle with that sometimes. Maybe on
Yeah.
a handful of those bills, those big issues where you just can't make it better. You can't
Mhm.
water it down or however you want to phrase it. It's just kind of is what it is with this one thing or whatever. But I don't know. I feel like we kind of have a moral imperative to, you know, do what we can where we can on the margins. And I've been able to make, stop bad bills in committee and help make that argument and stop them and get, Democrats on my VLA committee last session. We stopped a bill unanimously that would have prohibited firearms at polling places. Um, like that's a big deal these days with gun policy and where the Democrats are. And you don't hear about all those wins, and that's okay. And sometimes it's not better to celebrate those wins because then their wing of the party, starts to get louder. So there's things like that, but you got to show up, you got to do the work, and um, with the questions that we ask in these committees, we're able to uncover new stuff that comes out with this administration, with our state government. Our committee was working the budget part of it and requested some updated numbers about these other special revenue accounts, which are basically these departments kind of piggy banks that they end up ultimately into slush funds. We were able to get more information about how many unfilled but funded state employee positions there are. We thought it was about 1,500, and we got updated information. It was about 1975, 2,000 employees we're paying for that don't exist effectively, and that gets put into their kitty, and they can use it for things down the road. There's some limits on it, but it's still, why are we extracting that from the main taxpayer? Obviously, government's running without these 2,000 employees. Even if, okay, well, at 17, at 100,000 each, you're talking about 150 million, 170 million that we're taking from the taxpayer every year. That we're keeping the
Wow.
lights on, otherwise.
Yeah, that certainly adds up. It's nice to hear about, like, because I learned about that this year. I think the first time I heard from it was maybe Sobolewski came on the podcast back in either it was like January, or he came on another time too. So I can't remember, but he had brought that up, and I was like, oh my gosh, like on these positions that they basically just create positions so that they can get more money in their budget, and then they use it kind of largely for whatever they want. And so learning about that and getting that out into the public is really, really helpful. And so I'm glad that we were able to do that. I think you also had some, when we get into the issue of spending, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you propose a bill that is going to help us have a better idea of, I think is it the no bid contract? Is that something that
Yeah,
you
no, I
were able
worked with Steve on that. Um, we were able to get it unanimously passed in the committee and the House and Senate. I think, we won the argument. That the stories came out with the Auditor Dunlap and the main wire, and basically for those that missed it, our state government doles out about $2.1 billion in different kind of contracts, and all the different kind of contracts to different vendors, whether it's landscaping or IT or whatever. So there's that. But then Secretary Dunlap, as part of his job to audit, looked at a portion of contracts and found that there was large issues with a lot of them. Either the dates were after the job was done, or the project justification form, the PJFCs, they were not filled out all the way. You have to like at least try and rationalize why we can't, go to bid. Is it because we need it tomorrow? And that's why, there are some other, they're the only people that can fulfill it. Therefore, we can't go to bid. But it was seriously lacking, and would be cause for concern in a corporation, a private business. But um, what my bill did was say basically you got to keep a record of this stuff that's available to the public at the very least. Right now, if you wanted to keep a tally of the no bid contracts, they only exist on the website for 7 days, and then they disappear into the ether. So you'd have to check the state website every 5 7 days to keep a tab, and then it's not searchable or anything. So basically, my bill says they got to post all of this, they got to keep up there, keep an archive of it, and they have the end of the year to do it. So they should be able to do it. Steve Robinson was able to do it with a Python code he got from AI, and I think he's sitting on about 4,000 of these that they're coming through, and we've seen some really interesting stuff come out of it already. Whether it's the money that the state, the Janet Mills administration literally pays to the Bangor Daily News or the Press Herald to talk about why our education really isn't in the toilet as far as our test scores and our results, and so they pay them for some cover, and the BDN got some as well, I believe. Um, so there's connections with family, with the landscape, just a lot of stuff, and so there's an example of, I got a couple bills across the finish line this session before. So, you know, there's still work to be done, even in divided government. You know, we're not like, changing the world or anything, but we're, working the margins and winning the argument where we can. And ultimately, giving ourselves ammo and for the next election. And this governor and these Democrats have given us a lot of ammo. So I hope we use it wisely and focus on pocketbook issues. I think those are the ones that are going to ultimately get voters to vote Republican that don't typically. I'm sympathetic about the sports issue. We voted for it, and it's definitely an injustice. But how much Mainers are they going to care if they can't pay their rent? They can't heat their homes, right? Like, we got to meet people where they are.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing, one of the conversations we had yesterday when I was talking to Raphael, because he got into basically socialistic ideology, and I was basically like saying, one of the reasons that socialism doesn't work is because it makes a false assumption about human nature, and that false assumption is that we're going to work just as hard for everybody as we would for ourselves, right? If that was true, socialism would work, but it doesn't work. Capitalism works because it's predicated on people acting in their own their own personal interest, right? We know that is human nature, that I'm going to first and foremost take care of me. If I can take care of me, maybe I'll think about taking care of somebody else, but first and foremost I'm going to worry about taking care of me. And because of that, I'm going to work harder to take care of me than I would if it was like, oh, take care of everybody and we all split it, right? That doesn't work, because I'm not going to be as motivated, especially if I can find a way to still get something, even if I'm like, oh, I can't work as hard because I have whatever. Anyway, I say all
Absolutely.
that to say how that kind of relates to, wow, shoot, no, I had it and I lost it. So people are going to vote in ways that are closest to home, right? We care most
Exactly.
about what is personally impacting us the most, and that's where, as much as I think we talked about this on the phone, as much as I think the issue of girl sports in spaces, and I'm actually more like concerned about the spaces than the sports, concerned about both, but like I'm more like dudes in girls' bathrooms. I'm just not I'm not okay with that, right? Like that's putting girls at risk. Um, as much as that is a huge issue for me, and as much as like I think education is a huge issue, I don't think these are issues that cause people to get out to vote Republican as much as how are you feeling it in your pocketbook, in your wallet, right? Those are the issues. I can't afford to pay my heating oil. I can't afford to pay my electricity. I can't afford, the increase in my taxes on my real estate, that kind of thing, or my rent's going up. Those are the things that I think really are going to drive people, hopefully, to our side, because things continue to get worse here as a result of Mills and her administration. So hopefully, we can use that information to convince people to look at
I
us.
think it
But
would be wise
um,
for us to win, right? Like,
yeah,
Democrats own everything over the last 8 years. They own here in Maine, the energy policy with the solar tax, the budgets, the one party budgets that raise taxes on streaming, on cannabis, on tobacco, and so Republicans have a real opportunity to be the change candidates if we can focus on that side of things. I think it's our best chance at winning big.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that it's an area where we're obviously we're in the right, on those issues. It's obvious that what they're
Exactly.
doing is not working, and everybody sees it. Like they're like, as much as it's interesting, because there's the conversation about what's good for the environment, and I think that we need to be, that's something we need to think about. But at the same time, we also have to think about, like, how do we make sure people don't starve and freeze to death, right? And so even if, even if we care about the environment, and even if they're right about these things being good for the environment, and I question that, right? um, then I still think we have to think about, like, how do people make it, how do we do this in a way that doesn't put people in the poorhouse, or make it much more difficult for them to get out of the poorhouse. And I think that's something that Democrat policy is not doing very well on. I haven't done a lot with energy on here, but I'd love to talk more about energy. I don't know if that's an area that is one of your areas of focus, but um, uh,
I
either
think to your
way.
point, the environment is an opportunity again here in Maine, and you gave them a lot of grace with the assumption of your premise there. Um, not to mention that electric is what 70% powered by fossil fuels, globally, I
Right.
think. So like we think it's clean because we plug it in and we don't have to see no dirt or something. Like literally, that's why we think it's clean because it's not, and um, or just as dirty as all the other ones at least. But things like the solar fields, the Sears Island wind turbine, offshore wind. Democrats have a great track record. The windmills on the mountaintops. Democrats have decades-long policy here of destroying our main environment to protect our main environment, and it doesn't make any sense. And people can see right through it when the windmills aren't spinning, when you can't recycle them, when they're leaching. They voted against a PFAS testing this last session of the soil around wind turbines. They care about PFAS everywhere else, but we don't want to know what these behemoths are doing to the earth under it. So that was annoying Democrat hypocrisy, and they voted for the offshore wind on to destroy this nature preserve of Nature's Island when there's a point right across the harbor there for them to do it. Reagan's been great on that, and speaking of energy, she's moved the ball a lot forward for the mini nukes, modular nukes, and having a couple of those rather than one big plant, and that would blow all these other energy sources out of the water. Other
Yeah.
countries are looking to it, other states. So I think we can't leave that behind. And but the Democrats, they own all this over the last 8 years. They can't blame Trump here in Maine. They can't blame inflation. Our neighbors next door in New Hampshire have those same issues nationally facing them, but they have a higher median income. They don't have the income tax. They don't have the sales tax. When you put that in and compare it with the property tax, that property tax doesn't sting quite as much as ours does when you're paying tax on tax on tax. So I think it's we have an A/B test, for folks that want to look at this. Where we're right next to each other, different governors, different policies, different politics, and they're coming out ahead. And we have a whole ocean. They got like 10 miles of an ocean. You'd think that would be enough for us to have a better economy and whatever, tourists, whatever. And no, New Hampshire's kicking our butt in all these different metrics. So it's something to look at. And Ryan Fecto couldn't figure it out on Matt Gagne's radio show a couple months ago. He, but and they have a bigger budget than us. They couldn't understand it. They raise more revenue and they take less taxes.
So interesting. So, like, a lower percentage of taxes. So what you're saying is New Hampshire's government has more money.
I think it was like 16 billion compared to like 12 or something, and otherwise we're pretty similar, smaller, bigger state,
Similar
more.
size. So they've got that, but they've got more revenue, but they're also only have, like, what, 150,000 people on their equivalent of main care, whereas we have 425,000 or something along those lines.
I'm not sure exactly, but did they do expansion or not? I don't recall. But yeah, I mean, even
Yeah,
look at it. I presume it's more businesses that are broadening the tax base, so they get more revenue, and the residents have to pay less.
I mean, that is the theory, right? That is what we're pushing for, and so it's nice to see a really clear example of what happens when you have the right policies. It's like you're talking about in New Hampshire, where they are creating an environment where businesses can thrive. And look, lo and behold, businesses thrive, and that means more revenue for the government, which is not necessarily the end goal. The end goal is to help people be more financially healthy, but it is also better for the bottom line for the government. If people are doing well, then you don't have to take as high of a percentage in order to be able to get the money to operate, right? I heard one theory that said, like, if you take the tax rate from 35% down to these don't not these exact numbers, but basically in terms of the amount of tax revenue you take in, going from 35 to 21, the government still takes in the same amount of taxes because of the growth in there's a point where if you drop the tax rate too low, theoretically your revenue will reduce. But if you but there's also a place where between these numbers you're effectively going to take in about the same amount of money in taxes.
That's the
um,
Laffer curve, I think it's
uh,
called.
Probably. All
It's the
right.
sweet spot. It's the sweet spot, right? Is what
Yeah.
you're getting at, and
Yeah.
you go too far, you have diminishing returns. And to your point, that's something we struggle with in the legislature because on the fiscal notes, and these fiscal notes have become just they've been weaponized by the administration because we have a bill. It does either, I want to hire 10 people and they say it costs this much. Okay, that makes sense. But maybe a bill that changes a policy or something. So the nonpartisan office, OPLA, um, forget the acronym. They do the fiscal notes. So they reach out to the right department and say, okay, this is what it does. What will it cost? And they rationalize it, however, and then it appears on our bill. And if we don't fund it, the bill doesn't go anywhere. So we've seen cases of bills that shouldn't have a fiscal note at all get one. There was one in my committee on a lottery one where you're telling the department to not register these people, to not care about these people, to not pay, less work. And they said they needed an employee, and then we pressed them on it, and he said, well, I didn't get all the employees I wanted in my budget, so I'm just been putting them on every bill. It's like, okay, that's a good way to do policy. That's a surefire way to make sure, we have good policy rise to the top. So there's they'll soften a fiscal note if it's a Democratic bill to, either make it zero or really, only the first, we don't fund it this year, but the out years we'll just get it in. And then if sometimes it's a Republican bill, it'll be a higher fiscal note. I've had, we've been going to war with the Office of Cannabis Policy and what they're doing with the licensing the grows and really sticking it to the legal growers. And they'll put fiscal make up fiscal notes on all those bills just because they don't like the policy, even though we had bipartisan support on it. But it would be really awesome if we had dynamic fiscal notes to what you're getting at, because right now they're called static. And so you cut the income tax. I had to, over 5 years, cut income tax to zero over 4. So we cut spending proportionally every year, what I'm saying? And it's like 15% or something, not even a huge amount. If these departments just could find 15%, over 5 years, we could get rid of the income tax. So, I proposed that bill. They put a fiscal note on it, and it's simply the naked. Well, it makes sense. You have to, I learned, you have to fund tax cuts. We can't afford tax cuts because the tax cuts cost the state money. So because we don't do zero-based budgeting and other reasons, so my income tax bill took away $2.5 billion worth of revenue. So that's my fiscal, and that's how much we pay into the state. So for that bill to go through, it'd have to get the votes, and then it would go to the appropriations table, and then the appropriations would have to appropriate that 2.5 billion and take it away from somewhere else. So that's a big obstacle to overcome. And then it's even bigger when there's no, it'd be great if it was dynamic. When we said, okay, well, we're going to cut the income tax. We learned in New Hampshire and in Florida that, revenue raised after they did that, or, whatever. That's our argument is you cut the taxes, people will reinvest, will encourage businesses to be here and to grow rather than leave. Um, and you mentioned Human Nature. That's a famous libertarian book that's about this thick that I still haven't cracked. Is that Mises? I think is Mises wrote that. And they want to do a millionaire tax. Well, what's their human nature say? Well, okay, my capital's not wanted here. I can move across the border to New Hampshire, or I can move to Florida and save a bunch of money, and then I'll just visit Maine for 6 months like I do anyway at our second home. I'm just not gonna, have my residency here. So it's I
Yeah.
don't know what the Democrats are thinking when they propose these things. These are the people that can afford to move. You're going to try to tax the people that can say, "F you, I'm out of here."
Well, especially given the fact that we have the Maine winters anyway, so there's already a motivation for them to want to spend some,
Yeah.
be a snowbird, right? And so there are probably a lot of people that are spend a lot of time in Maine, almost 6 months a year, but spend 6 months in a day outside the state to make sure that they don't have to pay taxes here. I mean, I remember there was a family that I lived with. There was a guy who was a surgeon, and when he retired, like he was saying that he was going to save $35,000 a year in taxes by having Florida be his primary residence. And it's like at that point, I mean, you could every couple of years you can buy a house down there. You know what I mean? Like, so obviously it's just like it's so like how in the world could you justify not having your residence in it, elsewhere? So yeah, we need policy that makes sense. And that you mentioned balance, that we don't have a zero based budget now. I think I probably know the answer to this, but that's not like a constitutional thing. That's just like a government decisional thing, right? Like we could have a zero based
Yeah.
budgeting, where every year we go back and we're like, well, what is actually necessary, and things don't automatically get put back and get a raise, because that's how it works, right? It's not just that whatever we funded last time we're going to fund again, but on top of that, there's a built-in automatic raise without even question.
There's those, whether it's the union agreements or whatever. Same as DC, and even when Republicans talk about a cut, they're talking about the cut of the projected increase, right? Like,
Right.
and so yeah, zero. We do have the balanced budget requirement, which is
Right.
good. I believe that's in our main constitution that we you know we
That
we
is, yep.
can't go into debt. Thank God we have that, or who knows what our
Well,
our debt would be here in Maine.
they seem to be
But
ignoring
the zero base.
it with the last budget. The last budget they passed, I think, ignored that. I don't. So I think they're in violation of the Constitution because Maine Care isn't funded for the second year of the 2-year biennial budget,
Right,
right?
exactly. That's right,
So technically,
exactly.
we
And
have
so, yeah,
balance based budgeting, but when the Democrats control everything, the rules go out the window.
yeah, I like to, remember the show Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's kind of like what the Maine legislature is. The rules
Yeah,
are made up and the dollars don't matter.
yeah.
So the zero-based budgeting would force them to like justify every expenditure, go back, and um, that would go a long ways to this, budget that just compounds. And now we've compounded so much that we're 65% more than when LePage left just, 6 years ago. And is anything in our life 65% better? 65% less potholes, 65% cheaper housing? No.
Well, it
So
was
we could afford to cut the income tax. There's just no political will to do it. The Democrats do not want to reduce 1 cent of revenue, whether it's there's so much they're so just greedy about. There was bills to like stop the double taxing of precious metal, like gold and silver, and so you have to fund. They put a fiscal note on that because apparently there's so many people in Maine buy that the sales tax they need that 5.5% from all the gold and silver purchases. And I think they put $1 million fiscal note. So what does that mean? They'd be like 550 million dollars in sales to get that 5.5%. Am I doing the math wrong? Anyway, um, they wouldn't even do that. We tax gold and silver at the point of sale, and you have to pay capital gains on it when you sell it. So it's we're taxed on both sides there, and they wouldn't even let that go because it costs the state $1 million. They won't give up one
supposedly,
red
yeah.
cent,
Yeah, it's
supposedly.
it's
Yeah.
it's so disappointing, and it's like one of the conversations I have with people, and I actually had this with a family member recently. Is like the problem is that I don't trust the government with anything. Like like it would be one thing, like if the government could show in any way that they had a good track record of positively impacting, as you said, are things getting better? The answer is no. Things have gotten worse and worse and worse. Now, part of that, it has to do with the printing of money in the Federal Reserve. But when you look at things like inflation, when you look at jobs in Maine, these things are a lot like inflation has nothing to do with the state. That's more of a federal issue. But when you look at like jobs, the cost of living, all that other kind of stuff, that's directly related to Democrat policy at this point, right? And there is a better solution, and we have that, and that's why we've got to win in 2026. So I know you got to get going, but anything else that you'd kind of maybe one of you, your favorite
I got
win
a little more
or
time, so I texted
yeah,
him. Whatever you want to, we can go a little longer.
okay,
Whatever you want
okay,
to, what do you
yeah,
think's
yeah. So
important to talk about? I'm game.
yeah, so again, we'll just say obviously, we got to win in 2026. That's that's number one. That's really important. And at every level, we got to win House, Senate, and gubernatorial. In my estimation, the most challenging of those three might be the Senate. It's either it's probably actually with Rick Bennett running as an independent, having been a former Republican, the three-way race in the gubernatorial where the independent is a former Republican is a challenge for sure. But either way, I think the House is very much open. I think the Senate is a little bit more tricky, but there is still a path
We
there.
need
And then the
one of those,
gubernatorial race, where
whether it's
we
the House or
get at
Senate,
least one of those, but we
because that
we need
the reason why we just need
all of
one
them. But
is the majority budgets. If we have
yeah,
one house or one chamber, then they can't run these extra constitutional one party majority budgets where they adjourn before July or March 1st, 31st. So it goes into effect in time, and then they bring us back for a fake special session. If we can get one chamber, they have to work with us on the budget, and that's the single biggest thing. And then the governor, what if we get the governor and don't get the House or Senate? So we need a governor that's going to have a strong veto pen like Paula Page did, because that's all
yeah,
we'll be able to do is veto.
absolutely. And so when you were one of the a couple of fun questions, like what's your biggest win and biggest loss in the time that you've been in the legislature? Like what's something you're most proud of, and then what's something that like you're most frustrated about?
Um, Great question. Um, I was pretty happy about the procurement bill that we discussed earlier because it, is pretty objectively good transparency, good government bill. So one that was a winner and loser, I guess you could say. I've put in a bill twice. Each time it passes the House, 100 votes at least, generally. Big bipartisan bill, but it stalls out in the Senate. It stalls out bipartisanly in the Senate, unfortunately. And this bill basically would help address our lawyer shortage, especially our rural lawyer shortage. And basically, it'd say you could read the law like we do in Washington, Vermont, like Abe Lincoln did. And all that means is study under a lawyer for 4 years, set up this apprenticeship type program, and then you still have to take the bar, but you could become a lawyer that way without going to law school. And it's important because one, they're letting out violent criminals, that because we don't have enough public defenders and indigent defenders, and we don't have enough lawyers, we don't have enough prosecutors, we don't have enough defense attorneys. So they're letting folks out, and then when we go into the hinterlands, there's a real demand for just kind of a not like a country lawyer, but kind of a jack of all trades because they just people in town. They just need someone to do their will, or the divorce, or the family, or a business, incorporation, kind of a little bit of everything. A Main Street type lawyer. And the only way you can become a lawyer now in the state is if you move to the most expensive city in the state, live there for 3 years, and go to Maine Law. They have no online school. They have no night school. They have no satellite campuses. So, do we really think, a young person growing up in Presque Isle goes to college, goes to UMaine, they're going to move back to Presque Isle to pay their six-figure student debt? Probably not. They'll probably hang around in Portland or move down to Boston or something, where they can actually afford, somewhere have a job to afford a house at least. where you can't have both of those here in this state. So I'm not sure. You know, some lawyers were for it, some lawyers were against it, but at this point, it seems pretty existential as far as the Sixth Amendment goes.
So what's the reason that it was bipartisanly shot down in the Senate? Because it seems like it's a practical bill. Like the thing that like makes me, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll defer to the
Sure.
lawyers to some degree, and I'm going to have some conversations with a couple of friends of mine who are lawyers. But like if they're able to pass the bar, like it seems like that is the bar, literally. That's what it's called.
That was my
And it
line.
seems like they should have a pretty good sense of if something more is needed, if they need more information, more knowledge in order to be a lawyer, then maybe we have a strong, maybe the bar isn't strong enough, essentially, right? So we make it so that it's strong enough so that if they can pass, then they should be able to practice law. What was the argument from the other side? Like, what's the story? Why are they against that? Is it
Um,
just do you think it's just that I'll ask two questions. One is like, what is their argument? And then the second thing is it just that many of them are in the pocket of the main University of Maine system that doesn't want that because they want people to have to go through them?
yeah, no, I think the argument was, from the law school, from some other lawyers that they felt like the quality of representation would go down. And to that, I guess just say, is representation better than no representation, which is kind of where we're at now. And it kind of okay. So also, do you presume that law school doesn't produce any unethical lawyers or bad lawyers? That was kind of, I think that's what it was. There's definitely some camaraderie when it comes to lawyers and law school, and it being the only law school in the state, and it's a tight knit community. So um, the governor was not a fan of it. I think that ultimately didn't help. And there's a couple of Republican senators that were against it too. And I'll put it in again. I think it's a good bill, and I don't think our judicial system's getting any better. Um, and
No.
I'm next door to Auburn, and we had that issue with they couldn't find a lawyer for him, so they lowered the charge, and that made his bail lower. So he made bail. He got out that weekend. He burned down a house. He killed somebody in the house, and then he got sniped by the police on a roof of a house, all just the following weekend that he was let out. And he had a history of some violent criminal crimes as well. So it's right here front and center, and it's only going to get worse if we don't address it. We're losing federal funds for some of these some lawyers, and Republicans got to be for the whole Constitution, the whole Bill of Rights. They're all so important, and I mean, and they cut both ways, right? Look, the Sixth Amendment should have applied to the J6ers, right? They didn't get a speedy trial. They shouldn't
Right.
languish in Guantanamo or wherever the hell they were for as long as they did, and um, we it's for everyone, and we got to remember that. Just like free speech isn't just for people we agree with.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Yeah, I think crime is one of the biggest issues. So like let's just briefly, like what would you say are the main issues where we win in 2026 and the issues that we need to continue to beat the drum beat on? I think like the aspect of crime is probably one of them, is what you just kind of mentioned, and that's part of the problem there with not having appropriate representation. It's allowing us to be in a situation where we're letting people out that shouldn't be let out because we don't have the resources that we need. But what are the issues like that really will move the needle for us in 2026?
I think there's a couple. I think we got away from welfare reform the last election cycle, and 4 years ago, the last gubernatorial, which is a little ironic because Governor LePage was the one who brought it to the forefront, and we were able to pass great bills in like 2011 and 2012 to stop, welfare for being able to use on like alcohol and lottery and like tell people that today they didn't even think that like, are you kidding? That was allowed? I was like, yeah, that was allowed. So, um, a lot of that has been since reversed or whatnot from Governor Mills. So I think there's some synergy with what's happening federally. They're talking about work requirements for welfare. It's what we've tried to institute here, 20 hours or volunteer or something. There's tens of thousands of adults on working age adults that are just
I
on some kind of
I
assistance.
I think I've heard that it's somewhere around 80 or 90,000, basically single adult males, that, or maybe it's just single adults, either way, with
Think it
no
might be
kids,
just
that
adults, but yeah,
just adults that
single.
are on that are not working, that are on main care, and there's
It's
no,
a
yeah,
huge amount.
or
We
yeah,
can't afford it. Um,
yeah,
Socialism works until you run out of other people's money, right? And
right, yeah,
folks are tapped out that are trying to get by. So I think um, the welfare reform, addressing the cliff, where there's no incentive for folks to get off of it when and
yeah.
work because they lose their assistance. So broadening that cliff a little bit more, I think, would be helpful. I think the housing crisis issue is one. I see this in the paper that there's a house in a duplex in Gray that's like 200,000, and there's 100 people have already applied for each one or something. And this was like a state program to pay to renovate it and then to sell it below market. And I guess that's good. It's not really good. It's just more government intervention. But if we deemed it so necessary, but like it feels like we're just tinkering around the edges with any of these housing projects. Like we need some bold solutions. We need 80,000, I think, is the number, and we're nowhere close. And so, I mean, we can't escape the fact that this is the housing supply is not immune to supply and demand, and um, we in it's whether it's luxury homes or starter homes, we need it all. And I think people get kind of wrapped up, but just more inventory would be good because we're all like hermit crabs, and we'll move to a new house that's a little bigger, and then now our old shell is open up for someone else to go from renting to their first home. And it's a great thing to invest in. I didn't invest enough in Bitcoin, but I did buy a multi-unit when I some years ago, and it's done all right. But I'm in Portland, and rent control is just a disaster.
Yep.
More government intervention. We're trying to keep it just to Portland, really, and explain to these other cities that it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare to enforce. It's a nightmare for landlords to try to figure out whether how much they're allowed to raise each year, and then the DSA go back for more. They say no, you don't get to keep up with tax increases. No, you get 70% of CPI, not 100%. You don't even get to keep up with inflation. Screw you. Uh, and so it's just a nightmare there. And so I think housing, Republicans have a lane there. We can talk about building. We can talk about getting government out of the way. They're passing bills to expand the vernal ponds when some fairy shrimp develop in your skidder puddle from your machinery there, and now you can't expand. You're landlocked, whatever. You can't do anything. So. Um, it's like they care more about housing for some bugs than actual Mainers. So
Humans. Yeah.
that's the one place we can't destroy the environment to destroy the environment. Windmills, mountaintops, the ocean, uh, our farms with solar panels, that's fine. But I got a friggin' bug in my backyard now. I can't build my garage. So I think housing is a big one. And then I think one that we normally cede to Democrats, we can also have an opportunity, and that's healthcare. And healthcare is hospitals, right? And the hospitals are crumbling in our state. They're closing every couple months. It seems like, God forbid, you have a baby outside of Portland or Bangor, and you have to drive an hour at this point. With these pregnancy centers being closed down. So what have Democrats done for healthcare in our state? nothing really, right? Other than, force an experimental vaccine down our throats and threaten your livelihood over it. Um, but so we had a bill to say Representative Drinkwater had a bill to say the state needs to pay the hospital bill within 30 or 90 days of service or whatnot. Because right now they just go on, and it's really tough for these hospitals. They only have like 2 weeks of cash flow, and they're like waiting on the state for these big checks. And the Democrats voted that one down. So it's just like you can't win with them. And but I think that's a real opportunity. I think it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. You're fucking. Oh, excuse my French. You're friggin' scared of getting sick
Yeah.
and like real sick, like where you have to like sell your house and your car and everything, your 401k to pay for some medicine that your insurance doesn't cover for some stupid reason. And that's where we need to learn from the Dems is we got the Trump did a good job of kind of economic populace, but we need to bring in all these folks that are just mad as hell. And it's a raw. We've gotten a raw deal from our government. It's rigged against middle class people, against poor folks. You mess up one time on the ladder, and you're playing catch up for years and years and years. And the rules don't apply to the elite. They get to flaunt them and be pedophiles and stuff,
That's yeah, that's the elites are pretty
seemingly,
crazy. Well,
allegedly.
well, yeah, yeah, allegedly, although it's pretty obvious from the fun Epstein files, but we'll leave that alone for now. Although, like, just for fun, I'm kind of curious because I think those are all really good points. Obviously, we already talked about energy; that's another really huge one. So,
Yes,
housing,
yes, yes, yes.
energy, taxes, right? These are all pretty big issues. And then I do think that there is a segment of the population. I do think we need to continue to chant the protecting girls' sports and spaces thing, because there was a report that just came out from somebody in the UN actually wrote a report saying that like transgender treatment of minors essentially is dangerous. It's about erasing women. This is somebody in the United Nations. Um, I can't remember exactly. I think she is working in an organization that's focusing on protecting women against abuse and things like that. And so a report that came out at that high of a level is saying that this is dangerous to kids, that they don't have the ability to have informed consent. And so I do think that this issue is going to continue to get bigger, and we will win on this issue, but not only on this issue. I think there's a segment of the population that this will motivate them to get out to vote.
And we didn't
So
solve
it's
it this session. It's still
yeah,
lingering out there. We didn't tackle it. And I've been trying to have parental rights be my North Star in this issue. And
yeah.
so, 16, 17 year olds without parental permission, no, I don't think so. And, the sports, and I do have concerns. Just I guess I would say that parental rights cuts both ways, and we need to acknowledge that a little bit and kind of remember it. And whether it's you want to teach your kid creationism or not vaccinate them, or you want to teach your kid evolution or vaccinate them, and then how far do we take that? You can be a bad parent and really mess up your kid and it be perfectly legal, right? Like you can be a bad parent and not break the law either. So I guess I just worry half the country thinks you're a bad parent if you vaccinate your kid. The other half thinks you're a bad parent if you do vaccinate your kid. Are we going to start sending CPS after these parents or those parents? And so just I don't have some silver bullet or anything, but that's just kind of how I've tried to approach these types of issues in the legislature as a stepfather and as somebody with gay friends and trans friends. And um, I think again, are we the party of freedom? We don't have the freedom to
Well,
indoctrinate kids. You don't have the freedom to, but I don't think anybody, I don't know. Some people want to be adults. People can be adults. It's a different
yeah,
issue.
Well, and I think that's where, like, and again, I'm not going to ask you to agree with me on everything. We are the big tent party, and we don't have to agree on everything. But I do think that, like, the big issue there is, like, there is the Hippocratic Oath where doctors are required to do no harm, and like, if we're talking like physically transitioning children, like, the data seems to suggest that's unhealthy physically, like, scientifically, for people to go through those surgeries and start taking hormone blockers. The long-term impacts of those things are dangerous. So even if you want to say, like, aside, I do agree with parental rights, but there is that reality, right, of, if this is documented and obviously bad, then it's something that doctors wouldn't they be
Are these the
violating
same
their
doctors
Hippocratic
that said
oath?
the vaccine was safe? You know what I
Well,
mean?
I mean,
Like
that's a whole nother. I mean, the
the
doctors
same
are a mess.
scientists?
Is right?
Right.
Like,
Well, we
the
shouldn't
doctors
rely
aren't
on
doing their
them.
job. I agreed. Agreed. No, I hear what you're saying, and generally speaking, I'm very much in favor of parental rights. But when it comes to transitioning, physically or chemically transitioning, if somebody thinks they're, I don't know, parents. I'm not going to tell parents what to do in
It's
terms of
different than
how they use
socially
pronouns, and
transitioning, and
exactly,
it is
socially
different.
transitioning
I
is a
acknowledge
is a
that,
different
and
thing. And though I'm not in favor of that personally, like, what we do to regulate it is a whole nother story. And when you're dealing with adults who make their own decisions, I'm not, I don't, but I think it's an interesting conversation. But I appreciate your perspective, and I do think there are a lot of people that are in that camp. But either way, like, I think it's there's work to be done there, and I think we win on this issue in the long term. So that's
I
another.
agree. I agree, especially with this the sports issue. And I just I know a lot of these folks are Republicans that I know, and so we need every
Yeah,
vote we can get. And
yeah.
I just also, the space issue thing. I don't disagree. It should be, but also, like, okay, there's no perverts of the same sex. There's not any dude perverts. Are you gonna let your kid in the bathroom either way? You go in with them until they're old enough to be in there by themselves, right? Like whether it's a boy, but I think we just, I just worry about making that connection and you know, uh, kind of putting. There's plenty of heterosexual,
I think the reality is,
abusers.
like,
There's straight abusers, right?
we don't. So what I'll say is, like, obviously, suggesting that people, because that people are specifically pretending to transition or are transitioning in order to be able to, like, get close access to young girls, like, I'm not saying that everybody's doing that, right? Like, that's not what I would say. But what I would
I'm sure
say,
there's somebody out there. Absolutely, yeah.
what I would say is, I remember, like, I know what it was like. And again, I didn't do anything crazy like this, but I do know that there are people who will take advantage of that, and anything and we need to be cautious around anything that we do as a society, to make sure that we're looking at the potential unintended consequences and make sure that it's not too high of a risk. And I think in this case, especially dealing with teenage boys in the schools, it's a risk that's not worth taking. But that's not to say that every teenage boy who is trying to transition to be a girl is trying to do it in order to be able to see naked girls and to do stuff like that. That's not what we're saying. But
I agree, and
anyway,
it's all about parental rights in my view. And then, like, for example, that
yeah,
counselor that's sent home a girl with a chest binder in the mid
yeah,
coast, if you remember that story.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
that's totally inappropriate. And the other
yeah,
thing that kind of grinds my gears is this presumption that the parent can't handle it or wouldn't be affirming. Like, the parent is not even given the chance to,
right,
like, be on this side or whatever, if you want to call it sides or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, there's just a presumption that the parent, whatever reason the kid didn't hasn't told their parent yet or whatever. Well, they must be a monster. They can't. And now the parents contributing to the duality of the kid because they're in the dark and da 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 da. And you know just because there's detransitioners out there doesn't mean illegitimate one way or the other. It's not, so both sides. I feel like, again, this is me, probably doing too much to try to hold nuance for this issue and pretending that we can have. I appreciate our conversation, and you're the exception to the rule, but like it's tough to have like discussions about these issues and think about how each thing affects other folks. So I appreciate that. But I think some of these issues are more nuanced than either side would like
Well,
to imagine, and there's just so much dogma on both sides.
Well, it's great that you mentioned that because this podcast is called Muddy Waters, and it's called Muddy Waters
True,
because
true.
politics are complicated. It's the reality is like some of it's by design, but this is the intention to keep people in the dark. But some of it's just that some of these issues are more complex than I think people would like to say. I think one of the things I brought up actually yesterday, and I brought up a number of times, is when it comes to education, like, do we need to get woke out of schools? Yes. Does that fix all the problem in the education system? No, like there are complex issues that I think a lot of our Republicans are like, we just need to change the curriculum to go back to the normal stuff. We need to get these again the woke ideologies out of the school system, and then our grades will improve, and whatnot. It's like, well, no. One of the biggest problems we have are so many kids with trauma, so many kids with challenging situations due to the incredible number of like broken homes and the trauma that comes with that. That we do have. I'm not saying that I don't like what's happening currently, but like the reality is, like, fixing education in Maine is much more complex than simply getting woke out of school. So everything is much more complex than it looks like. There is a lot of nuance, and I think we need to be mindful of that as we approach this, and have conversations, do the best that we can to inform people and let people make their own decisions. You and I, just like, well, not just like, but like Representative Raphael from yesterday, who I disagree with on fundamentally on just about everything that we talked about. But there are areas of civility and having civil discourse where he and I agree. You and I agree on a lot more, but we don't agree on everything, and that's okay. And we can have this conversation. I think diversity of thought, like, this is where DEI and the whole DEI thing, right? Diversity is actually a good thing. Okay, let's just say that. I think diversity is a good. When you have diverse people from diverse backgrounds approaching an issue, you're going to get a lot more potential solutions and be able to make a better decision from more information. The other issues are a whole nother. Equity and inclusion are where I tend to inclusion largely because it forces me to use things that I don't necessarily agree with. I am about, generally speaking, including people, but when you force my language and force me to agree with things that I don't agree with, I have an issue there. Equity, obviously, huge issue with, let's give people jobs that they don't qualify for so that we can meet certain quotas. Bad. But diversity is good. And having these conversations, having this dialogue is how we move forward, how we stop being in our silo where either you completely agree with me on everything or I cut you out of my life. It's just not really helpful, or I won't talk to you because I disagree and I
Yeah.
just get so angry. And it's like, we need to be calmer. We need to agree that there is nuance. We need to be okay with agree to disagree. And that's one of the paths forward for our society. So I appreciate having this conversation, and yeah, it's been great. Before we like kind of let you go, because we've gone way over what your original time was, and I want to be mindful of that. I
Okay.
do I do want to ask a question. Oh gosh, I had a question about something that's going on nationally. Well, there's one thing. Who's your favorite person in Congress? Do you have a favorite?
Uh, probably Massey.
Thomas Massey. So
Uh,
you don't agree that he should be primaried for not voting for the omnibus bill?
no, I don't think so. I mean, he'll be fine. He wins all his primaries like 80-20, and he's made him fundraise a bunch off of it. But um, no, I voted no on the budgets, and obviously all the Republicans did, so I'm not like a Massey in that regard. But there was speaking of your colleague yesterday, he was one of the couple Democrats that came with me. There was a bill for it's called New Market Tax Credit, and basically it was corporate welfare for Maine businesses, and I think it cost 100 million over 10 years. And got up and gave a speech and said, hey, why are we spending this money for some of these businesses when we could put that money to fund a tax cut, like I talked about earlier, to have broad-based tax relief so that businesses actually want to come here and not just like triaging on the businesses that are still here. And like 30 Republicans and a couple Democrats voted for it, and that was one of my more principled stands, if you will. But Massey, just like Massey, Justin Amash before him, Ron Paul, obviously, they just have a fidelity to the Constitution, and they mean their oath that they did take, and whether it's the Fourth Amendment issues with the Patriot Act, or now this Palantar, and um, or the war powers. We had a bill here in Maine, and it's similar to what they're talking about. Um, well, it's the exact same thing, pretty much. Basically, we had a bill here in Maine called Defend the Guard, and said if you're going to take Maine National Guard to go fight in a foreign war, well, then Congress has to declare the war. It has to be constitutional. That's what the Constitution says. But we haven't really done that since World War II. We just have the War Powers Act or National Defense Authorization, um, and so we haven't had a vote on war really since at least Iraq there with that one. So Defend the Guard said if you're gonna send Maine National Guard to go to Israel or Gaza, Ukraine or Russia, then Congress has to have a vote at least first, and that didn't go through. It was split. There was Republicans against it and some Democrats. It was bipartisan both ways. But Massey, trying to force a vote on that with um, Iran. I'm glad that seemingly has moved past us. It felt like World War III for about 3 days, and maybe that was Trump and his 4D chess and negotiating in public. And all right, I gotta beat you up a little bit. You got to beat me up a little bit, and then we can all save face. And but I think we're also kidding ourselves as if Israel or if, Israel, Iran, anyone did a targeted attack uh, on U.S. soil, we would take that as an act of war, right? So
Yeah.
we can't think another country wouldn't take it that way. But we're the bigger boys on the playground, so they have to, act accordingly. So I'm glad that hopefully is resolved. But I'm just so through with our foreign interventionism, Chuck. Why do we pay foreign aid at all? Like, why are we giving other countries money when we're 35, 36 trillion in debt?
Well,
And
well, especially when, as like Ron Paul is so famous for having said, is like foreign aid is taking money from Americans to give to the wealthy people in other countries, because that's ultimately where it ends up going. It goes to corrupt politicians and things like that, and so it's not actually really helping the poor and the impoverished people for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions, but by and large, it's not really helping people in those other countries. It's helping the warlords and the wrong people. If we could find a way to do it more effectively, and we had a plan to attack the national deficit, because I think that is a huge concern. I'm a huge Thomas Massey fan, by the way. I got really irritated when they were talking about they first. Well, I shouldn't say first. They probably talked about trying to primary him before, but like when Speaker Mike Johnson was coming up again for who was going to be the new speaker, and he was the one who was one of two maybe that was not supporting Mike Johnson. There's all this stuff about wanting to primary him, and so I just started arguing with people. Here's the reality, like on X, and as a result of that, by the way, Thomas Massey now follows me.
there you go.
I thought it was pretty fun. That's one of my claims to fame, is that Thomas Massey, who's probably one of the more famous House reps because of his stance on these issues. He followed me because, like, look, do we want I get it. There's a lot of people out there that like Trump's plan. They like Trump's agenda. They want to see it move forward. I actually largely do, but that doesn't mean I want him to have a Speaker of the House, for instance, that doesn't have a spine and would never push back against him, even when he makes a mistake. Because Trump, I like a lot of what he's doing. I think I was a little cautious and concerned about the Iran thing as well. I happened to be in Kenya at the time. I had flown to Kenya and I flew back through after this happened through Qatar, by the way, which is one of the places that Iran sent missiles to. So for a little while, I was like, "Am I coming home? I don't know. We'll see what happens," because I was supposed to fly through Qatar, and if things had broke out, who knows what would have happened? I mean, I would have found another way back, but it was an interesting position, being especially that I flew through a place that got bombed as a result of that. Although, again, Iran let us know what was happening. It was largely a save face kind of attack, but. but that was really interesting. So I'm concerned here and there with some of the things that Trump is doing. I don't like that he sent weapons to Ukraine and things like that. But like by and large, I'm a fan of Trump's agenda, but I still think that there should be checks and balances. Actually, that's how our Constitution was set up. It's not that we elect a president. It's not, we don't elect a king. And like if you guys are out there and you like Trump, great. I'm glad that you like Trump. I like his agenda. I think everybody needs checks and balances. That's actually how our Constitution was set up. If you are trying to claim that you agree with the Constitution and you think that Congress and that people in the House and the Senate should just roll over and let Trump do whatever he wants, that's actually antithetical to the Constitution of the United States of America. And so, like, please, recognize that while you may support his agenda, you also need to not forget the Constitution. And it's very frustrating to me, and I'm sure it's frustrating to you to see that. And again, I really want to see, like, I do think one of the things that's interesting is I'm okay with Massey, like voting against the budget, especially because it's this like ridiculous omnibus bill with all kinds of, there's a lot of really good stuff in it, and a lot of people out there are basically like, well, if we can pass this, it's more good, there's more good than bad, there may be some bad in it, but like we got, like, I understand that in the current environment, like that's how the world works, but how do you change that is
We're
one of
never
the
going to fix our
questions.
country. Like that's
Right.
just what we do when we win. And
Right.
one night it all house of cards will fall, and we'll be like Zimbabwe if we don't get ahead of it.
Well,
And like foreign aid, you know, we could support Israel, but we actually give more foreign aid to Israel's avowed enemies than Israel itself. So if we went to zero foreign aid, it'd be a net gain for Israel because we wouldn't be giving weapons to their enemies. But it's just you see the chokehold the military-industrial complex has,
yeah.
on both sides of the aisle, and they need a new war. We go to Afghanistan, Iraq. Well, we ended that. Well, we got to keep the money coming, and so it's war is a racket. Look, there's people making a lot of money off of war, and it's a really really sad way to make money because there's human consequences and loss of life, and um, we gotta do something different. So I wasn't for the really too excited about the reconciliation bill because it's just more of the same, and we
the
can't run
the
as
the
fiscal hawks and do this.
the theory or the hope that I kind of hold out for that, because I agree, but like again, the argument that I would have had if I was on Trump's team, and the people that were defending him are not, you better vote for this because Trump won a mandate, because I get in trouble regularly by saying, what are you talking about? This, I never heard this term mandate until after Trump won this election, and people were trying to use this term to force people to get in line. Um, like, but regardless, like, that's not the argument that you make. It's not Trump is our king, we must obey him. It's like, if you actually think that this has merits, argue the merits, right? And if you want to make the argument, and some people have done this, a few people, not many, that like the plan is we're going to reduce taxes, it's going to cause economic growth, that's going to, and that economic growth is going to cause more tax revenue. We talked about this earlier in the podcast, right? Cause more tax revenue, and we're going to be able to use that to hit the budget, hit the deficit. Okay. And then also we're going to ratchet up tariffs a little bit more so that we can use the money coming in from tariffs to hit the deficit. Okay. If you want to say those things, great. I think that those are things that are valid, but those were not the arguments that people were using. It was, it was like, we gotta primary Thomas Massey and get in line, and it's just like, that's not our government. And so anyway, just fun stuff. So, well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on, David. I don't know if you had anything else
Thanks
you
for
wanted to
having me.
share along those lines, but I think we've hit that pretty well in short order. Try not to talk too much national politics, because we, like, one of the problems we have here in the state of Maine, obviously, is not enough people actually know about what's going on locally. Fortunately, we have the Maine Wire, which is trying to do what it can to get more information out there. But that's also why we exist. So thank you everybody for watching. If you want to support the podcast, there's a couple ways to do that. One of the biggest ways is to go to muddywaters.us, and we have a shop, and there's things that you can buy on there to support the podcast, some fun t-shirts, and hats, and I get some things like this. Nobody's going to want a Muddy Waters polo, probably. That's more for me. But there's a bunch of stuff on there that you guys could check out and buy. Hopefully soon, there's going to be Muddy Waters coffee coming. So that's something that is going to be
Bring some
in.
merch to the cruise on Thursday.
Oh yeah, well, we've got some Cumberland County Republican Committee merch that's going to be there. I don't want to overstep the Cumberland County Republican Committee's T-shirts that they're going to be selling, but there will be those. So speaking of the cruise, for those of
Plug
you
it.
who maybe don't know, there is a cruise coming up this Thursday. We still have an opportunity. Go to ccrcme.com and go to our events and click on the cruise. And we're doing a cruise on the Songo River Queen, which is runs on Naples on Long Lake, which is opposite Sebago. So it's going to be a great night, 5:30 to 8:30. The boat actually leaves at 6. But we can be there as early as 5:30 to 8:30. $50 for a person, $90 for a couple. Great way to spend a beautiful Thursday night, sunset cruise. So we hope to see as many people as possible there. There will be hors d'oeuvres and a cash bar, I think is the term for it. So would love to see you. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you there. And do you have a pick for governor? Real quick, last question.
Oh, well, I'm helping Dave Jones for governor. I've known Dave since I got here. He's been a mentor and a help and politically and personally, and he gave us space, for the Ron Paul campaign and for question one with the cannabis. So he was one of the Republicans early on that said, hey, look, this is something that's already here. It's safer than alcohol, or people use it for medicine. Are we the party of big government or small government? And I think prohibition is big government. So Dave, I think he's a businessman. He's an outsider. I think that's what we need. I don't think we need any more politicians or career candidates. I think we need somebody who's signed the front of a check, knows how to run an organization. This is an executive position. It's not like being a member of the legislature like me or Congress, where you're one vote on up or down. You're running things, and I know he's committed to a main doge to institute the zero based budgeting and see where the money's going, cancel these corrupt no bid contracts, and we actually have a plan to get rid of the income tax. Like you said, it's one thing just to say we're going to cut woke and cut taxes, and we're going to cut the income tax and the sales tax. That's a lot of money, you know and what if we don't have a Republican House help a Republican Senate? What's the plan then? So we're working, we're grinding. We'll be at the Charlie Kirk event on Saturday. We'll be at the cruise on Thursday, and I think I was joking with him the other day. There's a lot of strong Republican candidates, but vote for us. We're normal. You can have a beer with us, and like well, he's just an average guy, and he's a family man, and he's concerned because our country's not going to be what it was for us or for him. And he's a boomer, but he recognizes that they kind of screwed it up for us, and it just hard work doesn't get you everywhere. Now, and obviously, there's no substitute for it, but I think folks my age, your age, and younger feel like ahead, and you'll always be renting, and you always have a car payment, and you're always worried about getting sick, and you can't afford to start a family. So those are systemic issues that need to be addressed, and uh, I think David is up for it. I think he's the original Trump guy. He's been MAGA for day one, and I'm. I think I'm with you where we're on your stance on Trump. I like a lot of what he does, and there's some things I disagree with him, and that's okay. It's not you know, we don't pledge allegiance to him, right? But
Right.
by and large, I support his policies, especially the ones during the campaign where he's talking about getting us out of war and ending the wars, and being the first
Yep.
Republican to call the Iraq War a mistake during the primaries. That was huge.
Yep.
So he checks a lot of those boxes for me. But Dave's been MAGA since day one. Spent money helping him, getting the signs, getting TV ads, and um, but he has plenty of Democrat friends, and he's just the kind of guy that he's never met a stranger. And I think we need somebody that can work across the aisle. I know it's not a big thing to say in the primary, but it's just where we are. And also, like you said, like we we have the argument's ours to lose. Like we have the facts. We know, capitalism is the greatest provider of prosperity since the beginning of time, right?
Yeah.
That socialism leads to communism, and then leads to authoritarianism and dictators and loss of freedom. We know this. We know all this. We can articulate it. We should be able to articulate it. So this idea that we can't talk to the other side or engage, and that's what I like about Charlie Kirk is his events where he brings up the young people up, and all right, say your thing, all right, and I'll respond, and go back and forth, and like we got to have more of that.
Yeah.
And I think he can pull it off.
Yeah, well, I had a feeling, considering, I know that you're doing some work for David and helping him with his campaign, that you'd probably be supportive of him. I do think as you said, I think we've got a huge, a bunch of really good candidates. And I'm thankful that we have good candidates. And I, in my role, both as the chair of the Cumberland County Republicans and with this podcast, will not be doing any endorsements of any candidates, but
We're finding
but
hard for the Money Waters endorsement, despite your disclaimer. So have to buy you a beer on Thursday and
well,
teasing.
anyway, speaking of candidates, there are going to be three. There were initially going to be four. Unfortunately, Owen McCarthy had to drop out due to the loss of a close person,
All
and
right.
so he will be unable to attend. But we will have Senator and gubernatorial candidate Jim Libby, David Jones, and also Bobby Charles will be there, as well as, if you guys want to talk more, hear more from David. I think you're gonna come as well on
I'll be
Thursday.
there. And
So
tell me why I
um,
said something stupid today.
that's all right. All right. So thanks so much, David, and we'll see you all. Probably, I think tomorrow I've got a school board candidate, and actually one of the chairs. I got two different podcasts I'm running tomorrow, apparently, with Dane Kocher of the Libertarian Party. So it'll be a fun
Very good.
conversation. We'll get into more national politics and talk about what the Libertarians think of what Trump's doing. So that'll be a fun conversation. So we'll see you all tomorrow.
Thanks,